Okay, so good evening, everybody. My name is Elor, and today I'm giving a presentation on Quark Express. So, what is Quark Express? Quark Express is a leading desktop publishing software for creating and editing complex page layouts, and it runs on Mac OS and Windows. And it can be used for print, digital marketing, publishing books, magazine, promotional flyers, and graphic advertisements. And it is like Adobe InDesign, and each Quark project is indicated through a .qxp file. So today I'm giving a tutorial for beginners presentation. I will go through the basic step-by-step of startup, how to set up your layout, and how to edit your layout, followed by the function of Quark Express tools and how to manage your layers. Okay. So to start up, how to create a new document or layout. This is the welcoming window of Quark Express. So first you need to go to the Create section, and then you need to choose Project. Or you can choose the other option is that you go to the top left corner, and you go to File, and you select New, and then to Project. Okay. Once you've done that, there will be a new project windows popping out, and now it's time for you to set up your layout options. So you can set all your layout options manually in the new project window. And there are three layout types, print, app studio, and ebook. So for easy magazine print layout, what you need to do is that you need to choose your page size. Make sure you got the right page size, and choose the orientation of your page. Like for instance, if you want your page to be vertical, choose portrait. And if you want your page to be horizontal, choose landscape. And once you're done, click OK. And now that you need to check your layout to make sure it's correct, hold down Alt on your keyboard and to drag and move your page. Hold down Control and use the mouse wheel to zoom in and out. So you should have these blue guides. These are basically the margins, which is a physical borders of your layout, and you want to ensure that your content is in the inner part of the page. So if you are not happy with your layout and there is like something wrong, right click on your page name, which is on the top left corner, is right below File, and right click it and choose Layout Properties to edit your layout. Okay, and now let's move on to the toolbars of Quark Express. So this is the item tool, and you can hold down Control for temporary access. It is to select, move, resize, and reshape items. And this is the text content tool. You can use this to draw text boxes and work with text in boxes. And inside the text content tool, there is a linking tool, this one. And what this means is that, okay, for instance, let's say that I have a text box A and text box B. And in text box A, I write, today is a lovely day, but I don't want to go out tonight. And if you link text box A to text box B, it will be, today is a lovely day, but I don't want to go out today. Okay, and of course, there's a unlinking tool to unlink. And this is the picture content tool. It is to draw picture boxes, and you can work with picture in boxes. This is called the no content box tool. And inside the no content box tool, there's a rectangle box tool, oval box tool, star box tool, and composition zones tool. So this is basically to generate shapes. And so just choose the shape that you want. And then I would suggest to hold Shift on your keyboard while you're drawing it. And this is the line tool. It's basically to create a straight line. And this is the Bezier pen tool. And Bezier pen tool is used to draw complex lines with curves. And I would suggest to hold Shift down to constrain a line angle to 45 degrees. And the add point tool is that you can add a point to any type of path. And of course, there is a remove point tool to remove the point. And the convert point tool is to help to convert corner points to curve points and curve points to corner points. So that's a scissor tool. It is used to cut an item into distinct path. And the select point tool. The select point tool is to select curves or points to move or delete them. You can hold shift down and click to select multiple points. You can hold alt down and click a point to make it symmetrical. And this is the freehand line tool. It's pretty much self-explanatory. You can freehand draw it. And this is the table tool. It's used to create a table. You can choose the number of rows and columns first. And this is the zoom tool. The zoom tool is to enlarge or reduce the view. And the hand icon here is the pen tool. The pen tool is to adjust, reposition your entire layout. And of course, this is the basic functions of each tool. Every tool had a variety of properties and functions. Quark Express requires exploration and practice to be good at it. But I would say to focus first on how to generate shapes, how to manage items, and how to manage text. So just focus on these three things first. Okay. And you can refer back to my PPT for these two key commands. It's basically keyboard commands. Okay. Now on to how to manage layers is that go to Windows in the Quark Express menu bar and then to layer. So you should have the layer window over here. And then each layer has its own properties like colors and objects and shade and opacity. Now to add layer, just click on this plus icon here. And if you want to delete a layer, let's say if you want to delete this layer, click on it and then you just click the bin icon. And the default layer cannot be deleted. So what you wanted to do is that there's an eye here. You can see it. There's an eye here. So if you want to hide the default layer, just click on the eye and it will disappear. You can't delete the default layer. And then there's a lock function here. The lock function is basically to lock the layer in place and so that it won't move or budge. And what you need to remember is the top of the layer list means it is on top of the layers. So let's say that if I put these two together and on the list, the blue layer is on top, is first, and then the pink layer. So you will see the blue layer first on top of the pink layer. And sorry. This layering thing is kind of like Adobe Photoshop. And now I want to give an overview on Quark Express TV episodes with Martin Turner. Martin Turner is the author of Desktop Publishing with Quark Express, DTP Quark Express episodes. And in these episodes, he shared some tips on how to use Quark Express. You can check these episodes on YouTube. And this 8-minute challenge, basically it's an 8-minute challenge to try to create a print layout from scratch. And in this episode, Martin Turner said that he believed that Quark Express is the most powerful desktop publishing system in the world. This is what he demonstrated under 8 minutes, and these are what could be created under 8 minutes. Okay, and there are some other episodes like Importing for Word is Martin Turner giving tips on how and what to watch out for when you import Microsoft Word files into Quark Express. The typography, you can learn all about the archetype typefaces and how typography affects messaging, and see how justification, font size, hyphenation, column width, and other parameters contribute to legibility. And fonts and kerning, you learn all about the fonts, font attributes, how to adjust kerning, how open time fonts can help you to be faster, and much more. Okay, so these are the episodes here you can refer back to. I would suggest that you go check them out. And that is all for my presentation. Thank you.
Okay. 4 slides. Great. Okay, hello everyone. Today I will discuss the topic of writing headline. The newspaper have developed the headline writing into an art form, and the headline is the second task of copy editors to design a newspaper. For the content, there are 4 parts. Part 1, the importance and the functions of headline. Part 2, the headline writing process. Part 3, how to write the headline, and part 4, question and answer. For the first part, we should know the importance of the headline. We should grasp truth that the average readers do not read the average newspaper stories. The average readers read the newspaper only about 24 minutes a day, according to a recent study. And the 24 minutes is not all spent reading news. They may look classifieds and other advertisings or the TV list and the comics, so they have not much time to read news. But what almost all newspapers readers do is that they would look at the papers and graphics, and big types include the headline, captions, and blurs. A big part of readers' impression of the newspaper useful is determined at the newspaper copy desk, where the headline is written. So about the first function, it attracts the reader's attention, and why I use the right color, because it's the most important functions for the headline. And there are 3 ways to use these functions. The first is that you can focus on how the reader's life will be affected. For example, if the city council has approved a city budget of 30 million for the coming year, one approach to headline the story is that the council approves 30 million budget. And the second way is that you can use the magnitude of the events they address. There is an example that earthquake in Algeria kills 20,000. And the third way is that the headline can be written in clever or unusual. The example is that the hunger pains. The second function is that summarize the story. Most headline designs to inform, not entertain. Simply summarize as concisely and accurately as possible. The example is that the US-China to sign major trade deal. And the third function is that help the readers in-depth the content of the page. The headline also helps the readers determine what to read and what to bypass. In one sense, the good headlines help readers to determine what not to read, such as right pictures. There are many headlines, and if you look at this page, you can find which topic you're interested in and go deep to the news content. The third function is that depicts the mood of the story. The straightforward news headline indicates that the story it accomplishes is a serious one, and citing the mood is even more important when writing the headline for the humorous stories, such as this story, Judge lectures strikers, and from the word strikers you can find it's a funny. You can find it's a funny headline, and when you look at the content, you can find it's humorous stories. The fifth faction is helps set the tone of the newspaper. The headlines probably reveal as much about the tone or chapter of a newspaper as anything it concerns, and serious tones as well as sensation ones can be cited with headlines, such as these examples. And the sixth function is that provides adequate typographic relief. They separate the stories on the page and relieve the tedium that would exist with masses of text-sized type, such as this picture. So officina, this word have separate stories on this page. And then is a part 2 about the headline writing process. There are two critical steps. The first one is that you can select which details to use, and you can use the keyword method. Most good handline, like all sentences, have a subject and predicate, and usually a direct object. Like this handline, Tornado Strikes Houston. And the second one is that freezing them properly within the space available. Make the handline fit. Synonyms may be necessary to shorten the phrases, and more concise verbs may help, such as this handline, the twist rips Houston. This handline has the same meanings with the last handline, but this handline is more shorter than that handline. And we should know understanding the handline orders. It is important for the editors to write the handline. The instructions for handlines are written as 3 numbers separated by hyphens, such as this 1-24-3. We should know that the first number is the number of columns the handline will cover. The second number is the point size of the handline, and the third number is the number of lines in the handline. So this number means is that the handline is 1 column wide, 24 points type, and 3 lines long. And we also should mention that first, don't measure in inches or centimeters, but in picers and points. And the transformational relationship is that 12 points is equal to 1 picers, and 6 picers is equal to 1 inches. The second point we need to mention is that the graphic elements and the column wise are measured in picers and points, but the height of type is measured just in points. And then we also should know the handline terminology. We should know that if it's just one handline, it's called the handline. But if there is more than one handline, the handline that makes the main point is the main handline. And other handlines called the second deck. It adds additional details or different angles beyond what is in the main handline, and it may be 1 to 4 lines long and in a lighter typeface. And it may even be the italic and either half the point size of the main handline or the next larger standard point size above the self. And for these pictures, the new style is the main handline, and you can see it's in a bigger point size, and the first shape is the second deck, and it's in a smaller point size. And then it's about the handline, and then it's about the hammer and kicker. The hammer is not the toy that we use to strike someone, but it's a label hand. It's typically 1 to 3 words long and above a main handline. It's used mainly with features in bold type, and for once the main handline is in a lighter and smaller type. And compared with, there is also a label handline called kickers. It's also above the main handline, but with the kicker, the main handline is a bond one, while the kicker is half of the point size, and half of the point size or the next standard size above half of the main handline, and it also in a lighter type. For these two pictures, no charges for Wilson is a hammer, and the mother death is a kicker. And then we also should know the mechanics crafting a newspaper handline. And there are 4 parts. The first is about punctuation. there are many steps that first, most editors write downstyle handline in which only the first word of the handline and other proper names are capitalized. And don't put a period at the end of the sentence unless your newspaper still calls for a period at the end of a conversational deck. Third is that use a single rather than double quotation marks. Like these pictures, it's use a single quotation marks. And about the grammar, except for the hammer kickers, catch lines, 1 or 2, 3 words in handline type, accompanying a photograph, and a few magazine-style titles. The handline should be complete sentences, but with articles and adjective missing. And you should also write in present tense about events that have happened since the last day's newspaper. About the future is shown by changing will to to. And as an example is city seal to discuss the sewer bombs. And the right pictures use rises to show that we should use in the present tense. Also for the line breaks, the multiple line handlines should break at logical place at pass between the natural breath units, such as these pictures. The place nap has over multi-modals. It's breaking logical places. And don't split the modifiers from the words they modify. And don't split prepositional phrases over 2 lines. As for the abbreviations, never abbreviate the days of the week. And never abbreviates the months or states that AP does not. Never abbreviates the person's name, and typically it's permissible to abbreviate these cities, such as the Kansas cities as KC, the Los Angeles as LA, and New York as NY. And the right newspapers is abbreviates the Los Angeles to LA. And it also may use a person sign for the word persons. And then let's turn to the part 3, how to write a handline. First, you should start by writing your ideal hand for the stories, then try to fit it into the space you have. And it's useful to jot down keywords from the story that need to be in the handline. Then build the handline around these keywords. And there are 3 parts. The handline that tell is some tips on writing the informative handline. The handline that smell, I will add more tips based on the examples of actual handline, bloopers by professionals. And the third part is handline that sell. Some tips make a handline sell a story by explaining its way that is striking. About the writing informative handline, first we should get in the keywords and be as specific as possible in presenting the news. And then after you've written a handline, forget for a moment what you have read, and you should check the handline that would you have a clear understanding of this story. If not, you should rewrite. Such as this example, the jury hears Holman was sly, and you find that you can't get a clear understanding of it, so you should rewrite. And the correct one is victim sly with his own gun. Third is that you should make sure that the handline is accurate. Don't exaggerate or mislead. And such as right pictures, the new pill will reverse aging. This is a phenomenon of exaggerate the content. And the fourth point is that try to match the tone of the story in a handline. So if it's serious stories, you should use a serious handline. And if it's a light story, you can demand the light handline. And the fifth tip is get information from the top, but don't repeat the lead or give away a punchline or ending. The sixth tip is that don't over abbreviate. Use only the abbreviations everyone know, like that CIA, FBI, or UFO. And the examples of unacceptable abbreviations is that DOS is for the Department of State, and FD is for the Fire Department. The seventh tip is that the question hints seldom work, and avoid them unless the point of the story is to raise a question to which it doesn't present the answers. The eighth tip is that don't use obscure names or terms in the headline. And the last tip is that don't repeat words in the big type within a headline or between lines or captions or the blurs. And we can see from the right pictures, it abbreviates the CIA, and it's correct. Then about the headline, the headlines that smiles, and there are also some tips from the headline bloopers. The first is be aware of typos. This is very easy. You can see from the example that the public is a wrong word, and it's public. The second is that avoid headlines that say nothing or state that obvious, like that the city council to meet, it don't see anything in reader's mind. And the third is that review of double entendres. The double entendre is that it means that it has two meanings, and it is ambiguous for the readers. So the example is that the doctors offer sniper reward. The fourth tip is that be aware of misplaced modifiers. The example is that Scotland Yard arrests 3 men carrying explosives and 7 others. So we don't know the 7 others is carrying explosives or don't carrying explosives. This is because of the misplaced modifiers. And the fifth is write the accurate headline. The subject of the story was oil import, while the headline is right that the White House hints at ceiling on the oil spending. It doesn't match to the content. The sixth is that don't rehash the old news. For example, on Monday, if we see the news that says Messi to speak at awards dinner, well, on the Thursday comes follow-up stories. If the headline writers repeat the Monday headline, readers will wonder if it reads the same news. And if you have another one like the ticket available for award dinners, the reader will continue to read it. And the seven tips is that watch for the label. For the stories on the arrest, the headline should say 2 arrested in robbery, not the 2 arrested for the robbery, because the headline writer must understand that under the U.S. justice system, a person is presumed innocent of any crime charges until proved guilty by a jury. And the eighth tip is that don't overstate. If the headline is West Louisville students at UL to get more at, and if the lead would repeat it, it's incorrect. The 9 tips is that don't command the readers. The headlines that begin with the verbs can be read as a command to the readers and should be avoided, for such as these examples. And then it's a subparts for the headlines that sell. There are also 6 tips. The first is that alliteration. Alliteration is repetition of sounds. Alliteration should sound natural or at least make sense. Like this headline: the crows cry encore to the street corner carousel. And about the second tips is ramps, like this headlines, dollars for the scholars. And the third tip is that balance and contrast, like this headline, they bring the new life to the old towns. To contrast the new life, to contrast include the new and old. And the fourth tip is that pounds. This is one of the most often used headline tricks. And like this headline, the clockmakers put hers into takers. The fifth tip is avoid the headlines. Avoid the words that get overused in the headlines, and such as these words: the blast, the corpse, the eyes, and gives note. And the last tips is that let the story speak for itself. Sometimes you don't want to be cute, and the story is interesting enough by itself. You just need to put a keyword in the headline, and people will want to continue to read the content. And what to do if you are stuck? If you can't get a line to fit, look for standard names for each individual word in that line, and that might be longer or shorter as in need. And then you can also look at the suggested hint from the where service if it still stops the story. And if you can't think of the revolutions, you can also ask for the other editors for help. And then it's a part for the question and answers. The first question is very easy. Which of the following is not a function of the headline? I think you can make it immediately. The answer is C. Make a conclusion for new story. What is the meaning of the headline orders? The 3-6-2. In these questions, you should know which number is what meanings, and you will do it immediately. The answer is A. 3 columns wide, 6-point type, and 2 lines long. And what is the problem of this sentence? The school board agrees to discuss education. Is it typos, or is it misplaced modifiers? If you look for the sentence carefully, you will find it's the problem of this sentence is vague headlines that say nothing or states obviously. So it discusses education while it don't have many details about it, and education is too big for the readers. They think that they don't say anything about it. And the last question is about true or false. This is also an easy question. For newspaper headline, use a double quotation mark rather than the single quotation marks. Yeah, the answer is false. You should use the single quotation marks rather than the double quotation marks. Okay, that's all.
We got a presentation. We're gonna plug that into here. Okay. Show down here, that show button, that next one, the like screen. Okay, let's let me see. For some reason, we're getting the thing instead of. Try that again. Close, and maybe I left one open. I'll close that. I think that should affect it. Try that again.
No. Oh, here it is.
Yeah.
Good evening, everyone. Today I'm going to talk about holistic editing. Holistic editing involves recognition at one time of all various aspects of a particular story. The standard requirement that the creative variation. To put a simple word, holistic editing is a sort of guidelines or rubrics that when we are covering a certain kinds of stories. And here is the importance of holistic editing. First, we must understand the audience-central thinking. Central thinking. What is our audience? What do they want? Where do they find us? That is the questions that an editor should think about when they edit a kind of story. Another is that editors must understand the distribution channels, whether we are distribute the news stories in print, online, or in broadcast. We must think the channels so that we could attract more audience. Last one is editors need to have tools for understanding audience and strategies for translating that knowledge to the stories. Here is the checklist I'm going to share with you tonight because there is so many kinds of stories and about holistic editing, and I can't finish it in one, so I pick up some major kinds of news stories to cover tonight. The first one is accident and disaster stories. Car crash, boating accidents, drownings, fires, tornadoes, floods, all could fall under the category of accident and disaster. When we report an accident and disaster story, we must answer these questions. Who was involved? What happened? When did it happen? And where did it happen? How and why it happened? As the officers on the scene, participants and witnesses understand the accident, and we must make sure that description of what happened does not imply guilt on anyone. Here is the priority when we reporting and editing accident stories. Death is more important than injuries. Injuries is more important than destroyed properties, and destroyed property must be more important than damaged property. And when we writing disaster stories, we must first simply describe the tragedy and the accident. Then we goes into the name and addresses and details of the victim. And here is some cliches about accident story to avoid, like a flowery host, tragedy, ramping rivers. And here is some phrases that we should be used when we editing accident stories, like autopsy to determine the cause of death, blazing infos came to a stop, and vehicles could replace like cars, truck. Another thing is advanced pieces. A press release will be judged solely by the editors, and he must ask himself whether this press release provides the readers with some genius news. A press release should never be printed as a publicity puff, but rather rewritten and expanded into a news structure. Here, the most important thing about advanced pieces is that we usually write this in personality profiles, or as historical piece about a person or group. And next, I'm going to talk about the business stories. The business news today is an increasingly consumer news, and this type of news faces a large ranges of audience. And this business news could include personal profile, focus pieces, and analysis pieces. Business stories will be bogged down when the statistics are not well explained. So we must pay attention to the numbers in a business story. That requires that editors should be equipped with the elementary knowledge of some business terms like ICP, GPD, these kind of indicators. They should understand. And business stories usage. First is dividends. Dividends should be referred to the previous dividend report from a certain company. And firm, this word could not be used interchangeably with cooperation and in business reports because firm and cooperations are not the same. And savings and loans, this should not be called banks. It may be companies, institutions, or associations. And technique and technology is not the same thing in business news stories because a technique is an idea, method is not technology. Another thing is court stories. When we're covering court stories, the editors must be equipped with the basic knowledge of the common law and the local law. And we should make sure that the reporting does not incriminate anyone that has not yet been convicted in court. And we should consider the ethics of reporting the names and addresses of victims. And the journalists and editors do not be protected from the reporting happened in court. And also we should avoid legalese because these words could not be easily understood when we're covering a news story, and it could be cliches and hardly for the readers to read. And court stories titling, we should change the words into this, like comprehended should be changed into arrested, court litigation should be changed into lawsuit, taken into custody should just solely use arrested. Another thing is crime story. As with accident and court stories, the worst thing you can do in a crime story is to imply someone is guilty who has not been convicted. However, we could just when we write a lead, we could just imply one's guilty, and we need to add that a charges is being filed. And crime stories usually have a delayed ID lead because most victims are not well known, and these details may not be relevant if the victim is not a celebrity. And we should avoid printing confessions until they have been admitted into court as evidence, avoiding printing names or addresses of junior offenders, and avoid gruesome photos of victims, and avoid saying a victim was unharmed if he or she was involved in a psychological harrowing situation like kidnapping. Another thing is focus piece. The focus piece is used primarily for writing an analysis of an issue, but it is adaptable to other kinds of features as well. Make sure there is another paragraph in a focus piece, and make sure it comes right after the feature lead. The last one is medical stories. The medical stories that has many professional terms that we should be avoid, and we should translate those professional language into plain language that so that our readers could be easily understood. Other kinds of holistic editing stories is like celebrity news. This kind of news could all be seen on our textbooks. Finally, I will talk about the steps in holistic editing. First, we need to read the context and identify which kind of the stories is, and to find the fine-tooth comb, and to have a big pictures and correct the grammars errors in these stories. The fourth step to do is fact-checking, to check the facts in these stories are true or not. The last is revise and display types. Here I have three quite quick questions. The first one is, what is the most important thing to do when you're covering a crime stories? The answer is C, imply no guilt on the suspect until convicted. If you imply his guilt before he's convicted, you could be face a lawsuit. And A, disclose the victim's names at the beginning, suggests the suspect's details it has conflicts to the journalistic ethics, and describes the details of the crime as detailed as possible. That is almost impossible in our journalistic reporting. The second question is, which of the influence is not correct about business stories? The answer is C. There is a huge difference between firm and corporations when we're covering business stories, and surely business could be focused on an individual or a certain incident that could attract more readers' attention, and editors should have elementary knowledge of business. The last question is, which one of the following should be avoided when we are covering a crime story? The correct answer is C. We should avoid taking pictures of the victims, not instead of the offenders. Thank you. My presentation is finished.
It's funny. You know, you get that down there. I think you can see the mouse. I need to bring a mouse pad, I think, to make it work right. A few comments on the, particularly the points. I think mostly on the headlining, just to emphasize a few things. I put on the Moodle site actually the video of this morning's headlining presentation, just because I felt like it was a good presentation, and I made a few comments after that as well. Previously, I made comments on headlining when we first started the design discussion. But it's important for you to understand that that's about 25% of your grade is headlining. And so that means it's very, very significant. Here, let me turn on the projection here. I see I have it. Change that. Two things, or a couple of things here just to try to emphasize. And then I want to go through real quick again that my final product in my demonstration of this project. It was mentioned that you and I mentioned in class the other day, your best friend as a headline writer is a thesaurus. As I mentioned online, there's dictionary.com that you can use to look at synonyms of words that you want to use. So as was pointed out, you kind of start off with what you want to say, and then you start figuring out how to say it in a shorter way frequently. That's one reason why we drop out the articles, an and the. We don't use those. In place of and, we usually put a comma instead of and. There's ways that we shorten them up. It was discussed that we, not to use too much headline-y, like cops, blast, eyes, gives, nod. While those are definitely sometimes overused in American journalism, there's a reason why they are, and that's they're short. And so if you need to shorten something up a lot, eyes means considers. Blast, of course, is obvious. Cops is obviously short for police. If it's necessary, you use those things. The suggestion that you avoid them is a good one. You try to avoid them, but when you get down to trying to squeeze a headline in, sometimes you have to use any synonym you can find. That is particularly true with one-column headlines. They're the hardest to write because they have to fit into this narrow space. And you need to get your, say, a one-column headline needs to be at least 3 lines, and each line should be within 3 characters of each other. And so that's almost impossible to do. I mean, it's very hard. My demonstrations of this are good, and so you can take a look at what I did with them. But it is a challenge. One of the biggest challenges is how to come up with enough different synonyms to make things work and make them fit into the tight space you have. And the hardest one, as I said, is the one-column headline with multi-line one column. So, I would open up, as you're doing your work, open up dictionary.com, click on the thesaurus button, and notice they've made a few changes with it that as I was demonstrating it the other day, they have one tab for nouns and there's another tab for verbs. And so I didn't notice that originally. They didn't have that before. And so you can, if you're looking for a verb, you click on the verb tab, and if you're looking for a synonym, because some words are both, or they, with very slight change, they're both. So I can't remember the one I was looking for, but it was both a verb and a noun, depending how it was used. So I had to click on the right tab, noun tab or the verb tab, to find the right synonym. He mentioned the down style, which is basically what I call the sentence style of headlining. That's the one I want to use because it's the most common, and that just means capitalize your headline as if it were a sentence. And so you start off with a capital word, and other than that, it's proper names, and in essence, nothing else. Proper names, and I guess you would say also acronyms, things like that. Writing a headline, the most important thing is to make it summarize or represent the story in a summary fashion. If you can make it cute, if you can use a pun when it's appropriate, a serious story, you shouldn't be using a pun when it's a real serious story. But if you can find a pun, if you can he had some good examples, alliteration and puns and so forth, some ways that you can write award-winning headlines. Frankly, I've never won an award with a headline. Mine were good summary headlines. So mine were represent the story, get people in the story, tell them what it's about, and those are the headlines I write. All the ones that you see in my example will be strong summary headlines, trying to emphasize the most important aspect of the story. I'm good at that. I never tried to be a cute headline writer. I've worked with some that are really great at it and win prizes all the time. And if you want to move up in the copy editing world, not necessarily going to executive editor, that doesn't necessarily equate to going up to managing or executive editor, but as far as maybe going to a bigger newspaper as a copy editor, learn how to be funny, learn how to be cute, write with puns and alliteration and so forth, and win some prizes. And I've seen people do that, and that's their main skill. Wasn't, you know, I was probably better than everything else, but they were good at writing award-winning headlines. And so they moved up to bigger newspaper. I didn't really want to move up to bigger headline newspaper, but that was beside the point. I'm just saying the difference between what they were doing and I was doing was I was as good or better than them in everything, but they wrote award-winning headlines. And so if you work on, maybe go back to this PowerPoint and read some of the different ways you can write cute or award-winning headlines, they're good. It covers it quite well. And so it's a good thing to learn how to do. I never bothered. Okay, let me, I went ahead and I finished my demonstration of this project. And so there's another video on Moodle with me finishing this project. I went kind of slow with it, partly because I went ahead and jumped 4 stories to page 2 in order to emphasize what I want you to do with page 2, whereas your assignment is you only have to jump 1. However, again, let me emphasize, if you only jump 1 story, that means you have to find a reasonable place to cut the other stories on page 1. Now, in my example, I probably could have easily cut 2 of the stories and kept them on page 1, maybe even 3 of them. And so I really didn't need to do as much with page 2 as I'm going to show you that I did. Looking at the headlines, you will get graded higher if you do subheadlines, what he was calling second deck headlines, because that is the norm now. If you look at the 30 pages of American newspapers, almost all of them have either subheadlines or summary sentences. Some will go with a summary sentence that is enlarged, like 14-point bold, something like that. Those are actually harder to write in a sense because you're trying to write them without totally being redundant with the lead. So I'm not really a big fan of summary sentences. I think it's better to have a subheadline and do a good job with the subheadline. So it's also, subheadlines are easier to skim. And the whole point of the new trend towards subheadlines and summary sentences is to allow the reader to get a better idea of what's in the story without having to read it. And so it does a better job of acting as a table of contents because people are in such a hurry. It was mentioned that they average like 24 minutes on a newspaper. I've seen much lower numbers than that the average person is in America spending, and maybe it's including those that don't spend any time, I'm not sure. But I saw there were some numbers that suggest they spend 5 minutes average per day with a newspaper. But that, again, may have included those that don't spend any time. So that may be the difference. Nonetheless, they don't spend much time. And so they, with a big newspaper, they're not reading every story. They're not going to read every story. The only people that read every story or most stories are retired people. Beyond that, the person who has to go to work or the mom who has to do something with her kids, they're not reading the whole newspaper. And so again, that's why we write headlines and subheadlines that summarize the story and make it as interesting as possible. We don't want to write boring headlines. We want to attract them to the story if they're interested in this topic. But we recognize that some topics, everybody's not interested in them. So we write interesting headlines, but we summarize the story fairly so people can decide whether or not they want to read it. So in this case, again, and in my front page, I put a subheadline on every story except the very bottom, lower right one here. I had so little room for a story, I decided it didn't make a lot of sense to write a subheadline. And so, because I had a photo I wanted to use, If we look at, if I hit Control 0, you can see the overall page. I wanted to use enough art so people's eyes are going back and forth. So with a broadsheet, you can use more than three. A tabloid, probably 3 good-sized pictures are the most you will ever get into a tabloid. But with a broadsheet, you can get more pictures into it. And so you see I got 5 pictures into it, one of them quite small. But it allows your eyes in. You have one center focus, but it then attracts your eyes to different parts of the newspaper as you use different pieces of art. And so with a broadsheet, you can do more than a golden triangle. Anyway, so as you see here, different sizes. Don't make them all the same size. Make them different sizes. Some are small, some are big, some are medium, whatever. And again, a subheadline with all but one of my 5 front page stories. On page 2, this is the part I wanted to emphasize today because I didn't have time to talk about it in class. I have mentioned some of these things. On page 2, I don't care if you do subheadlines on page 2, at least if it's a jump. If in the future we put, you have room to put a whole new story on page 2, then that whole new story would have its have a subheadline. But if all you're doing is jumping, then I would say one headline is plenty. So that would be my rule: is one headline for a jump story. But what some of you do not yet understand, let me emphasize. Your headline on page 2, best practices I'm teaching is your headline on page 2 is different than your headline on page 1. And it should be based on something in the story on page 2. And so in this top one, or the one I put at the top of page 2, is about the hiking. And the main person being quoted here on page 2 was talking about how good it made her feel to hike in the mountains, how refreshed and positive it made her feel. And so my headline reflected that. One reason that I came to believe that this was best practices to write a new headline is that my competitor was doing it. My competitor, when in the last commercial newspaper I started, I was competing against the daily newspaper I had previously worked for. And they, during that period of time, started writing new headlines for page 2. As I mentioned previously, but let me emphasize again, I found myself starting to read stories on page 2 that I never read on page 1 because their page 2 headline was more interesting to me than their page 1 headline. And so I would find myself reading backwards, so to speak. I'd read page 2 because there was something in their headline that made me interested in what they jumped to page 2. And then I might go back to page 1 and actually start reading from the beginning. Or I might not. Maybe all I was interested in was what they were talking about on page 2. And so the page 2 headline should represent the part of the story that is on page 2. In this top example, all of her quotes are about how positive it made her feel climbing the mountains around Almaty, Kazakhstan. The second one here is a continuation of the football story. And in this one, it happened to mention that the player who returned and became, started working as coach again, had a 7-1 winning record, had won 7 games and lost only 1 game when he was there before. That was the only thing I found that I thought kind of jumped out. That's a pretty good record to win 7 of your 8 games. And so I used that as the headline for page 2. Let me zoom in here on these other ones a little more. On the smaller stories, I ran out of, there wasn't a lot to these stories, which is one reason why I did not put the stories on page 2 in the same order that they were in page 1. That could be considered a good practice. But if your top story, which is the case with my bottom story on page 2, it has so little jump, it's hard to give it emphasis on the top of the page. And so I put it at the bottom of the page. So I'm more interested in looking at how much story is there? Is there some good art I want to put with it, and so forth? And I make that determination as to what I'm going to jump. Now, with a different headline on page 2, the real important factor that guides people from one page to the next page is the slug on the jump line. And so, again, let me expand this again, or zoom in a little closer. So this is the jump line on page 2. If we go back to page 1, what we would see is hiking in a single quote mark continues on page 2. On page 2, we say hiking continues from page 1. We call that a slug. And so just a one word, typically a one word that represents the story. That's how we know which story this is on page 2, that it's linked to on page 1 is a slug. No longer with the headline, because it's not the same headline anymore. And so that slug is very important, that you make a distinctive slug. What's the topic of this jump and the original story, and you use that same slug on page 1 that you use on page 2, and you're just changing, like I said, hiking continues on page 2 on page 1, and on page 2 you're saying hiking continues from page 1. Anyway, so I went ahead and jumped 4 stories, just mostly to emphasize how to do it, and secondly, so I took a little more time than I needed to finish the project. I could have cut these ones that had not very much jump. I could have cut those on page 1 and kept them there, and you can if you want to. As long as you feel like you've told your story on page 1, you can end of a sentence and not jump the story. So that'll be up to you to decide how many stories to jump. You're only required to jump 1. You are required to jump 1, so I know you know how to link. Now let me go back. When I was doing it, some of you may not have noticed quite what I was trying to do. What I want to do is open it up in Quark. I'm going to open up Quark and open the page there where I can, because this is just a PDF of it here. And this PDF is on Moodle, so you can take a look at it if you want to. So altogether, probably because I took time to explain, especially actually later on, I'm doing page 2, finishing page 1 and then page 2 actually took longer than what I did on during my lecture. So altogether, I suppose it may have taken me about 3 hours to do this. I'm expecting that it'll take you guys maybe twice that long to do your assignment. If you do it well, if you're going for an A. But you can, again, if you've done a good job of editing your stories before you come back, your deadline in this is the night of the second Monday you're back. In other words, you come back on a Monday, and this project is due the next Monday, I think at midnight, something like that. Anyway, it's late at night. It should tell you when you take a look at it. So you have all week, plus the weekend, plus Monday during the day until nighttime to finish this project. We have requested time in the room next door. The 105 is a Windows lab, and so some of you feel more comfortable with Windows. Some of you have already downloaded Quark into your laptops, and if you want to do that, you should get together with FISA and go ahead and do that, get that downloaded. But we are going to have some lab time next door in 105, and of course we'll have lab time in here as well for those that want to use are comfortable using Apple. If we feel the need, if you guys let me know, if for example you feel like you need more time, I will personally take time to come in and open up another lab for you, whatever I have to do so you can finish. But if you're waiting to the last day, that may be too late for me to make arrangements, because I have to go through the academic affairs office in order to to open up more time in one of these labs. And so if you get midweek and you think, I am not going to get this finished for whatever reason, let me know and I'll try to open up some more lab time. Because I don't even know, I've asked, but I actually don't know how many of you downloaded Quark into your laptops. So if you have it in your laptops, you have all the time, you can have all weekend to design it. You don't have as big a screen, but I did my demonstration on a laptop. It's not that hard to do. Okay, let me open this up in Quark. And I'm going to re-demonstrate something that I did earlier just to make a point. So if you recall, how did I set up my links? You may remember how I set up my links when I was doing page 1? I made text boxes out here in what's sometimes called the pasteboard. So I put another text box out here so I could go ahead and link from the story on page 1 and put the rest of the story out in the pasteboard. The reason why I did that is I wanted to see how much story was left. So ultimately I ended up not jumping one of these stories because I didn't need to. I only had like one line left, so I went ahead and eliminated, so I didn't jump. I guess it was the bottom left story here. I didn't jump. I thought I was going to jump and I didn't. If especially in your case, if you want to not jump some stories, you want to save some time, and you want to end your story on page 1, then it's helpful to see what's not on page 1. And so if you link to a text box right out here in the pasteboard, you can see, let me see, is there anything so important in this extra box, in this text box out on the side, that I should make sure gets into page 1? And so you can make a more educated determination whether you should stop the story, whether you can legitimately stop the story on page 1, and if you need to bring something up from this extra text box and reorganize the story slightly to do it. That's possible. So that helps you to go ahead and link your story right here beside it in the pasteboard. Now, once you do that, and I demonstrate this in my second video, part 2 of my project demonstration, then I just grabbed that text box and dragged it down to page 2. So let's say well, let me demonstrate it down here. So if I bring in a story and I had an extra story, so I'm going to go ahead and click in here and hit Control E to bring in part of this last story that I didn't use. That was speed, so I'll click on speed and open that up. So in here, I'm going to just click in here and go ahead and hit a Control A, and my picture's in the way here, and I can't seem to move it. I need to pause video. Okay, so so I want to change that into body text. I see they have a bunch of other crazy stuff with it, so I need to hit no style and then body text. So remember, you may have to do that. Let me go in here again, hit Control A again, and hit no style and body text to get it to look right. And I'm going to go ahead and change it to 3 columns just to make it look a little bit normal. So going over to the text box on it, hit 3 under columns. Okay, so it's looking, let me go ahead and hit Control A, or Control 1. Okay, so I have my story in here. I'm not going to bother to do headlines and stuff. I'm just trying to demonstrate this. And actually, it runs out of space. I'll go ahead and bring up the story a little bit further up. Okay, so I'm going to create another text box out to the side. So let's pretend this is page 1. Obviously, it's not, but let's pretend it's page 1. So I create another text box over here, and then I go to the hit the link button, and I click on the starting the original text box, and then I click on the text box I want to link to, and so we see it over here. Okay, my point is, let me go ahead and hit Control-0 now. Okay, so I have a second text box over here that has that doesn't actually have quite all of the rest of the story. So I'm going to click in it and make it a little bit wider. So I have all the rest of the story out here on the side. Once I have it out here, I can move this to another page. And so if you can, I don't have a third page here, but if you can imagine the bottom of this page here, let me just go ahead and, oops, I need to go to my selection tool. Let's say I was linking it, let's say I wanted to take it back up to page 1, and I wanted to jump it to page 1, which obviously makes no sense. See, I can actually put this text box that I have out in the pasteboard off of page 1, and I could go put it in page 2 or page 3 or page 4, wherever I want to move it. And so in some ways it's also easier, but you can link directly from page 1 to page 2, but I chose not to because I wanted to see this extra text. And so then having it out here, out in the pasteboard, then I just drug it down to page 2 and found where I wanted to put it in page 2 and started my page 2. So there are a couple of advantages to putting your linking to your additional text box right beside the text that you have, so you can do your editing, final editing, decide whether you need to jump it or not, whatever. And then you can take that text box and just move it to page 2, like I just did. Again, if you choose to, you can put the text box on page 2 and link from page 1 to page 2 directly. But in essence, that's what I would already be doing. I'm just dragging that text box down from the pasteboard of page 1 down to the pasteboard of page 2 and onto the page. Now, the reason why we need to link these text boxes, you have to do this. This is one thing I can be checking for, and I can check very easy. I can click into page 2. I'm checking into this, I'm just clicking into the hiking story on page 2. All I have to do is hit Control-A, and if it's linked to page 1, I'm going to see it is linked up here. There's page 1. I've selected page 1 text at the same time that I selected page 2 text. So I can tell in 1 second whether or not you've linked these boxes. And so if you don't link them, you're going to get some major deductions. You need to know how to link text boxes. The question is, why do you need to know how to link text boxes? The reason why you need to learn to link text boxes is because you're going to I made changes in my decision as to what I wanted to do on page 1. If you're a good editor, you will also make changes in your page 1 from time to time. And when you make that decision, oops, I'm going to do something different. I'm going to add a half-column mug to page 1, or, oh, I forgot to write my subheadline, or something like that. If you make that decision later, suddenly what you have, if you've just cut and pasted to page 2, now the text on page 1 doesn't match up with the text on page 2. You have a bunch of extra text now, and there's other reasons why it just doesn't work well. You have to, if you're going to be a professional, you have to link your text boxes. There's not an alternative to this. And the more you're into it, the more you recognize why. A lot of people I can't convince. You have to link your text boxes. And so, you just saw, it took me 1 second to check whether or not you're linked. And I will check every text box to make sure you're linked. Well, you only have to jump one story, so that's only one check, right? I will check to see that you're linked to page 2. That's one of the main things I'm checking. That's one of the main reasons why I added that requirement to this assignment, to have one text box or at least one story jump to page 2, is to see if you know how to do it. And so you can check, you can take the money to the bank. I'm going to check to see if you're linked to page 2. And if you're not, you're in trouble. Okay? Major deduction. You have to know how to do this. So I demonstrate how to do it 4 times on my video. So there's no excuse not to know how to do it, because in my video, I demonstrate it 4 times. Not once, 4 times. And so there's no problem with knowing how to do this, if you just take the time to learn how to do it. It's easy to do. For some reason, in Kazakhstan, I always had some students who would never learn how to do it. They're always trying to figure out how not to betray themselves, and they would make stupid mistakes, and it'd take 1 second for me to check anyway. And so I don't know why they didn't ask for help if they didn't know how to do it. It made no sense. But there were students at the end of the semester who didn't know how to link text boxes, which is absurd. It's easy, and they knew they were going to get a deduction, or they should have known, that they weren't listening in class or whatever. I don't know. See, what else did I want to say about this? I would say that probably the weakest point, and I could go back and change it, but I found, I think, at least 1, if not 2 mistakes in my headline writing today after I finished it last night, fairly late in the evening. I would suggest that you need to check your headlines. You need to try to finish up before that, early enough that you can walk away from it and come back and look with fresh eyes and see if you made any mistakes. Because I made 2 mistakes in being in a rush trying to get this done late last evening. And so if I make mistakes, you can make mistakes. I guarantee you, it's not hard to do when you're in a hurry trying to get something done. So it may be a mistake. In my case, one of them was I changed this headline, and I left out a second. I ended up having to rewrite it. I think I rewrote it this morning when I realized I made a mistake. But I left out a 2, and so it didn't make any sense the way I wrote it. So I had to rewrite the whole headline because I left 1 word out, and it didn't fit by putting the 2 back in again. It no longer fit once I added that. And so, and by the way, I end up having to jump more story over to page 2, which is a demonstration of my point, why it's important to be linked, is that I ended up, in rewriting the subheadline, I ended up making the subheadline bigger, and it pushed more story to page 2. So that was actually a live example of my needing to have those stories, those text boxes linked, so that it did automatically what I pushed out of page 1 automatically went to page 2, and allowed me to. And then I had to make a few adjustments on page 2. It didn't jump much, but it jumped a little bit. The other thing I would say is actually the same headline is my second mistake. The main headline and the subheadline are too close together. They're too much alike. I'm saying more or less the same thing. And so if I were to deduct points on my own page here, it would be that the main headline and the subheadline are too much the same. The other thing I realized when I came back today is that this small picture, this half-column mug here, was over here. And that made it too heavy. It put too many graphics over to the right side of the page. And so I pulled the half-column mug closer over to the left side, and so it balanced the page better. I mean, the biggest story is on the left side, and a small mug is on the left side. No page is perfectly balanced, but just moving that half-column mug over to the left helped balance that page, which I found, I noticed was off balance, too much off balance when I looked at it this morning. By the way, in balancing your page, a picture like this is 1 column picture. I could actually put it right here in the middle of the story if I wanted to, and push the text on both sides. So half column one side and half column the other side. I could, you can wrap text around two sides of a picture, and that sometimes looks pretty good. So that would have brought the balance a little more to the left if I pulled this picture down into the middle of the two columns and wrapped half a column to the left, half a column to the right, and that looks like pretty good sometimes. I don't know, any questions on that? Anyway, you have my entire demonstration. Obviously, I don't want you to copy my design. I want your own unique design. There's lots of ways to design any page. So obviously I have different stories, so you can't copy my headlines because none of you have any of these stories since they're from KeyMap. But some of you might be tempted to copy my design. Don't. If it's too much like mine, I'm going to figure out you copied my design. And it probably won't work out anyway because you're going to have different photos, you're going to have different size stories. It's not probably practical. In just doing this myself, I could have put this top story all the way to the top with it having the main headline and wrapping the story, the football story, around this picture. And so the picture could have been up in this area instead. Is one way to easily have redone this page. This story down here, where I could have gone 5 columns instead of 6 columns, and had a 1-column headline or a 1-column story coming down next to the 5-column story. So this picture could have gone into 4 columns, the story starting to the left of it, coming down, wrapping around it, and then having a totally different story here. I would have then boxed the story up here. In fact, I could demonstrate that very quickly. I'm not going to tonight, but maybe next week in class, I might change this whole layout quite quickly into a totally different looking layout, just to show you some different alternatives. When we get to the next project will be your tabloid. You should remember that your tabloid is exactly half the size of the main, maybe not exactly, but pretty close to half the size of your broadsheet. And so you're going to still have all these same stories to fit onto basically, you're going to have 2 pages, but they're going to be pages that are half the size. Everything changes once you go to tabloid. You will fill the entire page 2, but that's actually not the problem when you go to tabloid. It's how to actually cut your stories to fit on page 2, on 2 pages, because 2 pages of tabloid is the same size as 1 page of broadsheet. So however much you jump today will not fit into your tabloid layout when we get to tabloid. Okay, well, I'll end there, and we're about out of time anyway, I guess. I will stay longer, though, if any of your teams want to meet, want to do any discussions. Just to, again, reemphasize, your teams are mostly to help each other with the story content, and so you can work on editing the stories together. You have my permission to do that. You can... if somebody feels like they need to rewrite a story and the team agrees, you can assign one of your editors to rewrite a story if you think it hasn't been written well. That's up to you, or you can do that individually. You can do all your editing individually if you want to. That is one thing you could do while you're off on vacation, is take your stories with you and finish your editing if you don't finish it this week before you leave. I know one person in this class already finished both pages. She's done. Although she came to me so quickly, I gave her a few tips and things that she did wrong. I won't be able to do that for everybody, but she actually did it before she could see me finish my demonstration. So she needed a little bit of help on understanding what she didn't understand when she did hers. One thing that I guess I would emphasize, that I actually emphasized to her, and that is, if you haven't understood me before, I don't like pictures staring at the camera. If that's the only choice, then that's the only choice. But for example, the football picture here on page 1 was my alternative, was an action picture. On page 2, I did use a stare at the camera picture. There was another picture that was almost identical to the first one, and so I didn't want to have two identical pictures or near identical pictures. And so this was my other choice, is having this one with them staring at the camera. And so there are reasons why sometimes you have to use a stare at the camera photo. Sometimes it's political, is that your boss says, these people are so important, we're going to put this picture in, even though it's not a very good picture journalistically. Or let's say the president or the prime minister of your country is coming here, and that's the only picture you get. You don't get a chance to take another picture, but the prime minister is here on campus. Well, you're going to use that picture. Again, just because it's so unusual for the prime minister to come here to the campus. And so you're going to use it if that's your only option. So there's sometimes you're stuck with a stare at the camera picture. But I hope you can see the difference between a stare at the camera picture and the pictures I used in other cases. What I was trying to get here on these other pages. Now I criticize this picture here because there's no people in it. So the top right picture I don't particularly like. There's one person kind of walking up there, but it did illustrate the problem of parking. And so I don't feel too bad about it. But if you have a choice between a picture with a person in it and a picture without a person, you choose the one with a person in it, because people tend to look at pictures with people in them, not at ones that are just of whatever. And journalistically, it's a better picture. So this illustrated the problem, but didn't have, like I said, did have one person there, but hardly counts since you can hardly see her. But certainly this picture is better than the picture of everybody staring at the camera. I hope you can all see that. But this is an action picture. It's a picture capturing a moment of joy that they won their football game. This is a good journalistic picture. The picture, obviously the mugshot is not much. That's just a mugshot. I chose the one of him actually outrunning across, in this case, I think a desert in Australia. We're a little more natural rather than the one of him talking on campus. Although the one on campus would have some merit because he was on campus. This one, she may be staring at the camera, but that's obviously not the point of this picture. I don't know if she was staring at the camera or not, but you can't really tell what she's looking at because that's not really the point of this picture. It's more the mountains that they were climbing on their hiking around Almaty, Kazakhstan. This one down here, she's not really looking at the camera. She's just somebody captured at that moment eating a snack as they're out hiking the mountains. So I didn't feel too bad about that one. But then again, this one, I decided because I had a lot of jump, I wanted another picture, and this was basically the only picture that I thought was worth running at all. And so I did take the stare at the camera picture. So understand my values when it comes to photojournalism and try to use the ones that show more movement, more action, more reality, because staring at the camera is not reality. Basically, that's not journalistic in my book. There's a point to them, and some of them end up in newspapers, by the way. Sometimes a photographer can take a very nice picture of, maybe a team surrounding their trophy and something, and they pose that picture, and that's kind of what you're stuck with. But I don't call that photojournalism. I fight that as much as I can. So be aware of that. Okay, anyway, again, I'll stay around if anybody wants to wants to talk to me about something, or if you want as a team to talk about some stuff. Anyway. Okay, thank you.